Hello, everyone, and welcome to TCU Presents How to Remember, a virtual event from the TCU Alumni Association and TCU Magazine. I'm not sure about the rest of you, but just having those few minutes and seeing those images of that day from the TCU skiff and the coverage of that day just already starts some tears flowing and some reflections of what happened and where you were and what you remember. And we'll talk a lot about that today. It is my privilege to be with you for this next hour. My name is Deborah Ferguson. I am the morning anchor of NBC5 Today, 4:30 to 7, Monday through Fridays. I'm the moderator of this discussion. And most importantly, perhaps for this audience, a Horned Frog alum. And on behalf of everyone involved in today's discussion, we do thank you for taking time to join us as we reflect on the events of September 11th. We'd hope to come together in person, but obviously the circumstances surrounding the current crisis and the coronavirus have brought us together virtually. And we do appreciate the fact that you have taken time to be part of this discussion. 20 years have passed since that awful day. It was a day that changed us. It changed us individually. It changed us as a country. And in fact, it changed the world in so many ways. On the one hand, it feels like it was forever ago, but in some ways, it still feels like that day is very permanent, that we can go back there in a second and be stuck in time. Most of us of a certain age can remember where they were on September 11th when we first heard that the planes had struck the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and then crashed in that field in Pennsylvania. These are intensely personal memories. They are full of our loved ones, our surroundings, our fears, and our individual projections of what the future might hold. Though most of our memories do veer toward the traumatic, there are stories of hope and there are stories of togetherness from September 11th too. TCU alumna and groundbreaking pilot Beverly Bass has one of those stories. Beverly Bass, you need to know her name. She is a very important figure. She was the first female captain for American Airlines, a history-making woman. And on that day, September 11th, she was flying a jet from Paris to Dallas when it was diverted to Gander, Newfoundland. She and everyone on that plane then spent a week in Canada, and they were treated like family by the people there in Gander. Her story is now the basis of the hit Broadway play, Come From Away. Beverly had hoped to be with us today, but she was unable, but she did want to share this message.
Greetings, my fellow Horned Frogs. I'm sorry we can't all be together for the panel. Everything seems to be virtual today, seems to be the sign of the times. The 20th anniversary of 9/11 is fast approaching. I was a captain on a 777 for American Airlines on that day. We were en route from Paris to Dallas. It was about a 10-hour flight. And right over the middle of the North Atlantic, the co-pilot and I were notified on the aircraft radios that one of the towers had been hit. Shortly thereafter, we learned the second tower had been hit and all of the U.S. airspace was closed. So we diverted to Gander, Newfoundland. We landed in a very unique place. I realized right away that the town was unlike any other that I had ever been to. We were on the airplane for 28 hours before we actually got off. And when we walked into the small terminal, it was lined with tables and tables of food. We were nearly 7,000 passengers and crew that showed up in a 3-hour time frame unannounced. We nearly doubled their population, which was 9,400 people at the time. And we stayed for 5 days. When we left Gander, the mayor said it so perfectly. On day 1, we greeted 7,000 strangers. On day 3, we had 7,000 friends. And on the last day, we said goodbye to 7,000 family members. On the 10th anniversary, I went back to Gander with my husband, and the playwrights were there, David Hine and Irene Sankoff. They asked if they could interview me, which I agreed to. The interview lasted 4 hours. And 4 years later, we were invited to the world premiere of Come From Away, which opened in La Jolla in the summer of 2015. Come From Away is now playing all over the world. There are 5 casts in 4 countries on 3 continents, playing 8 times a week. And as a matter of fact, it'll be coming to the Bass Hall in October. So I hope to see some of you there. It'll also be at Dallas Fair Park in March. Thanks and hello to everyone. And let's remember our fallen on the 20th anniversary of that tragic day.
If you ever get a chance to spend some time with Beverly, definitely do that. And, as we kind of move forward in the program, some of you are probably thinking, wait a minute, Deborah, you're talking and talking. You've got a couple of other people there with you. I'm not ignoring Meredith Kasimis or Ron Pickock. We will hear from them in just a moment, but we did want to set things up a little bit for you as we move through this program. Beverly talked about, being in the air on September 11th, and I was on the ground on a motorcycle on September 11th. My husband and I had decided to take a motorcycle trip, and our destination was Santa Fe. And it was the morning of September 11th, and we were in Taos. And he came back to the hotel room, and he said, "Turn on the TV." He said, "Something's going on." And you remember that day immediately because of the images that stay with you. And as a news reporter, my job is to tell stories, to get information to our community. And I called the newsroom and I'm like, what do I need to do? Can I get back? I'm on a motorcycle and planes are grounded. And the answer was, stay where you are, get home safely when you can, and call us when you get back. But it was an eerie day. So many people, as you heard from Beverly there, stranded in different places and glued to TV sets to watch the coverage. In fact, the research from Nielsen found that September 11th was the most memorable moment in television history, twice as impactful as the number 2, which was Hurricane Katrina. The TV memories, of course, are things we can all share. At some point, September 11th did become a collective story. Our personal narratives combined, and we banded together as a people and as a country. We mourned together, and eventually we tried to move forward together. But the pre-9/11 world, we all remember, was never quite the same. No one was unaffected by what happened on that day, but some lives were altered much more than others. And that is the case with one of our guests, your fellow student, Meredith Kasimis. Meredith is a senior strategic communication major there at TCU. Meredith was 15 months old on September 11th. She was living in Springfield, Virginia. She had her mom, Sarah, and she had her dad, Lieutenant Commander David Williams. The lieutenant commander was killed in action in the Pentagon on that day. In 2003, Meredith's mom remarried Alex Kasimis, a widower in the Navy. As a military kid, Meredith lived in Virginia, Washington State, Tennessee, also lived in Belgium before settling in Alabama, and then now here in Fort Worth. After she graduates, her dream is to move back to DC to work in politics or perhaps a PR advertising firm. Meredith, we really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
I shared a little information about your dad. What do you know? What do you want us to know about him?
Well, what I feel like everything I know about him is from my mom and my grandma and all of his friends. And I feel like for me, what I always want people to know is I think just how much he loved his life at the time of his death. I mean, he truly loved being in the Navy. He loved being deployed and everyone that crossed his path. I also know that at the time he was a girl dad, and I know he loved being a girl dad, even though he was super into sports. My mom said every day before work, he would turn on ESPN to watch sports, and he loved golfing. And like a funny memory too is when my mom was about to go in labor with me, he was actually golfing. So it was just all these little funny memories I have of him that I cherish. And I feel like that's what I want people to know is kind of more like the good things about him.
Yeah. And we need to hear those kinds of stories, and you need to, to hear them as well. As we start this discussion, which we call How We Remember, kind of help us, Meredith, what are your hopes? What are the things that you want us to take away from the time that we're together?
I feel like for me, it's even though 9/11 was 20 years ago, which seems like such a long time ago, it is still affecting, for me, at least my everyday life. But for the greater population, it's still affecting their lives too, like ripple effects such as like the post 9/11 GI Bill. That probably would not have happened without 9/11. In recent events, also, it's like everything going on in Afghanistan, we would not have been there without 9/11. So just how it's still, you might not see it, but it is still affecting your everyday lives.
Yeah, and in fact too, I was surprised to see on the news yesterday that suspects from the terrorist attack are still
Yes.
in pre-trial hearings.
Mhm.
9 years they've been going through this. So yes,
Yes.
it is still very much part of our present. You wonder why we have TSA security, why
Mhm.
we have to, send our bags to the X-ray. It's because of what happened on that day. Meredith, we'll hear more from you a little bit later. But now I want to turn to Dr. Ron Pitcock, Interim Dean of the John V. Roach Honors College at TCU, serves as Director of Prestigious Scholarships for the university, and holds the J. Vaughn and Evelyn H. Wilson Honors Fellowship. Some of you may know Dr. Pitcock. He's a passionate teacher. He's devised many creative honors courses, including one called Cultural Memory in the United States. And as part of that class, he accompanies students to important places in our national memory, including the September 11th Memorial in New York City. Dr. Pitcock, glad to have you with us as well.
Thank you, Deborah. Good to see you.
As we talk about cultural memory, I've learned here, it is a way of looking at the past. It is letting history come back to life so that it can help us figure out who we are, where we are, and how it might help us go forward. So with that, Ron, let's just go ahead and turn. I'm curious about your own experience. Where were you when you first heard about the events of September 11th?
Sure. I just started work at TCU. I was in my first month. I was waking up and getting ready to come to campus. It was a strange time in the sense we talk about families being separated. My wife was visiting her family up in Indiana, and my daughter, my only child at the time, was up there with her. So I was here by myself, really knew very few people. And my life was more or less coming into the office, going to meet students and spending time on campus and then sleeping. So I was here and really kind of felt alone.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, and that may be the thing, the personal part of it that stands out from you with that day is not being with family.
Yeah, yeah, I think that was it's something that a lot of us share, in that we were constantly calling family members. We were trying to talk to them, and that's one of the other things that we don't think about with 9/11. But those communication networks that we relied upon so heavily, they were even breaking down. It was difficult to, through cell phones to connect with family members. So it was, yeah, it was a strange time in that sense for us. That family wasn't together.
Right. Meredith, you talked about, how the stories of your dad that you've heard from your mom and your grandparents, and that he loved golf and where he was, right before you were born. But what have they shared with you about what was happening on that day, on September 11th?
Yes. So on that day, I know the last time my mom saw my dad, because she was pregnant at the time with my brother, but that afternoon actually was when they were supposed to go to the doctor to figure out the sex of the baby. And so I know he went to work, and so he works in the Pentagon. So she got a call from him that was like, "Hey, turn on the news, like the Twin Towers have been hit." So she did that. And I think around sometime, I'm not sure when, my grandfather came over, because my mom's from Arlington, so her parents are in the area. They came over and I think turned off the TV, and I think my grandfather kind of quietly pulled her aside and was like, "The Pentagon has been hit." And I think that day, and then I think 2 days after 9/11 was spent, my mom's friends calling around local hospitals, seeing if anyone had like seen him. And then I believe around 3 days after 9/11 was when like the armed like military men came to the door with like the flag and was like, "We found your husband's body."
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, but your dad, Lieutenant Commander. I mean, your dad was a hero. He signed up to protect and defend this country, and maybe someday he would have been an awesome, on the PGA Tour, maybe the senior.
Yes.
But what was it? Do you think that the world, our country, lost when we lost your dad?
I feel like for me, it's just, for professionally, I feel like how successful he could have been in his naval career. I just know he was so dedicated to his work and was just so driven and motivated. And on a personal level, I just feel like we kind of lost someone that was great. Just from the stories I hear about him, I just don't know anyone that didn't like him or love him or think he was funny or kind of got along with him.
Yeah, I couldn't help it. I see this picture of you from the TCU magazine article of you with wearing your dad's Navy long sleeve shirt.
Yes.
That's definitely a big part of who you are as well.
Yes, it is. It really is.
So At some point, Ron, this story is very personal for Meredith, but yet, it is also a very collective story for all of
Right.
us. There is a piece of it that we all, have lived. So I'm curious, at what point of this did your memory start becoming that bigger collective memory? And was your experience, do you think, typical?
Right. I think my experience was probably more typical, in that I woke up in the morning, I turned on the TV. The first thing I heard was Katie Couric's voice saying, "Oh my God," as the second plane hit the tower, hit South Tower. Um, and then after that, it feels like a collection of snapshots, and those are those individual memories that happen. But one of the strangest things I remember is it's the first time I've ever seen students walking on campus and everybody was on their cell phone. And like that's the moment it dawned on me, like this is how we're going to communicate into the future, because this is how people were trying to touch base. And it felt like every student was on there. Nowadays that's normal. But back then it was very abnormal to see so many people walking on their phones trying to catch up. Um, and then, the other thing what happens is like these individual memories quickly became like a social memory that I was sharing with students at TCU. And if you remember, older alumni will remember that the old student union had a common space, a big room, had two TVs at both ends. And that room was packed. I'm going to guess there were probably over 300 students in that room. And some were looking to the left at the TV, some were looking to the right. And while there were that many people in there, they were behaving almost as one body. They were all quiet simultaneously. And then when they were gasped, they all gasped at the same time. The tears, the emotions, it was a very shared experience. So I think that, I started to move from individual memory to this kind of social and then collective memory pretty quickly. That's also a result of the media that was happening. We were all watching the same thing on the TV. We were hearing the same news. Yeah, so I think, interestingly, the collective memory with 9/11, it happened, it was pretty instantaneous. It was within the day that was happening for us, where in the past, because media was moving so slowly, that it took time to have that collective memory.
Yeah, and as Meredith and Ron are sharing their memories of that day, and me as well, those of you who are with us, share with your memories, get into that chat section and let us know what you did. I mean, Cheryl, thank you. Cheryl telling us she was working in academic services at TCU on that morning, watching the horror on the students' faces as they walked around in disbelief. She was part of that, collective part there. You talk about Ron. Laura, thank you so much. She was working as an executive in the executive office at Southwest Airlines. She walked in, the second plane had just hit. Headquarters had never been so solemn and serious as they started sharing 24-hour shifts. On that day, as you, and I think it's good to have these kinds of discussions to share, because obviously, Meredith, obviously it touches you so personally because of the loss of your father. I'm a reporter, did not have that direct experience, did not get to share the experience with my fellow colleagues in the newsroom because of where we were, yet somehow the emotions of that day are still so very raw, even without that direct connection. Is that something that you all find with others who you talk with as well?
I know for me, at least my generation, I feel like we're a little more far removed from it. For me, the stories I get with sharing with my friends and peers, it's more the stories they have from their parents. Like, it's not really, because we don't have memories of that day.
Yeah. So Ron, you take, as part of your class, you take students to that national memorial. And as Meredith points out, they weren't alive. They don't have that, real life experience that others of us do. So what is it like for them? What are the things they want to know, and how do they process the importance of this?
Yeah, it begins, working off what Meredith is talking about. I think some of their first questions are what happened. They know that something big happened. They know that it was large. They know that it was life changing, but they really don't understand it. So we have to read text just to kind of understand the history of this. And once we start to understand the history of it, that's when we start to really that's when they start to try to understand, well, what did this do, and why did this happen? But more importantly, how did it impact us? Because they're starting to realize that there's multiple levels of trauma that exist as a result of this. And And then that just unpacks a whole series of questions about who were these individuals, who were the heroes, what is it that motivates a fireman to look upstairs and to convince themselves that I can carry 200 pounds of equipment up the stairs, 67 floors. I think some of the most important aspects of them learning, though, is the first person narrative, and that's where we can study it in history and we can study facts, we can look at video, but talking to someone individually whose life has been impacted by this, talking to a responder and hearing their story and what they experienced and what it was like in that moment, that's when it moves from being a historical event to something that's very personal. Mm-hmm. And that's when the students begin to feel responsibility to carry this memory and understand that their life is forever shaped by this, and they have a responsibility to remember.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking about how, as Meredith pointed out, I mean, a lot of students, weren't alive. They don't know, they don't have the images and the memories that Ron, you and I do. Not that I'm dating us or anything, but I can relate to that because I was not alive when JFK was assassinated. So my husband was, and he tells stories about what it was like in their school when, teachers were crying and, and I don't have those experiences. But yet I understand the importance of that day and what it meant and can read about it and how it changed, our country. So I think that may be a good analogy there. Tracy Williams is with us now. Tracy, thank you so much for sharing this, telling us that she remembers the second tower fall while she was in the TCU student union, that room you talked about, Ron, trying to connect with students in London and creating safeguards there and having a raw voice from crying that it couldn't even talk to students. Tracy, thank you so much for what you did that day to try to connect to those students. And I think we saw that in that video that we presented of the TCU, of the Daily Skiff. I think I saw a headline in there that said the TCU students were all okay. But when you don't know, when you can't connect with people and find out, your mind is left to wonder and worry. Yeah, there it is. Thank you for putting that back up. Meredith, I'm curious, when are you okay talking about this?
Yes. And honestly, I kind of credit my mom for how well I am okay with talking about it, because she has done such a great job of, when I'm growing up, when we talk about 9/11, to also bring in the good memories of my dad and the good stories of my dad. So I feel, obviously there is some times where it is hard for me, but overall I am comfortable talking about it just because of the way I talked about it with my family and how it was never taboo for us.
That's good. That's good. You talk about, there are times where you are uncomfortable about it, and that, TCU magazine, I know that I read that when you were in rooms and places where that the video of the planes going into the World Trade Center towers and the Pentagon, when those are going to be played, that's one of those moments of discomfort for you. What do you do?
Yes, exactly. For the most part, it mostly was in grade school when you'd have your history day on 9/11, not so much in college, but that would just be one of those things. If the teacher was aware, normally I would get an excuse in class, but if the teacher was not aware and I went into the class realizing this was going to happen, I would normally just leave the room, and then after class just kind of be like, I'm sorry, I just was not comfortable watching this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure people understand. Even that is something that we talk about in our newsroom. And of course, my station is owned by NBC Universal. And, just the other day, we got our guidance on how do we handle our stories about September 11th and what is the video that we show. And I asked one of my managers before I started, I'm like, can I share this kind of information? Because I think people are curious. How do news organizations handle it? And, it says that it is permissible to use brief images of the planes crashing into the towers and the towers collapsing. It has to be done with management approval, and it's only briefly preferable to use stills and freeze frames, no moving video. And we need to warn viewers when the moment comes that these disturbing images are about to be shown. And I'm very proud that as a network, as a company, we do that. We are very careful with these images because we know, Meredith, that it does create trauma for
Mhm.
those who lost loved ones, and for so many who were impacted indirectly. And I was listening to another interview about, there's something about digital images that 20 years ago, digital photography and high definition resolution photographs was just still kind of, coming along. And in newsrooms, as pictures were coming back in, these digital images, these producers, these editors, these photo editors, photographers were really seeing faces of people, whose lives were lost. And, that is traumatic as
Mhm.
well. Is that something, Ron, that comes up in your classes that you discuss with the images, the video, the pictures?
Yeah, we actually try to avoid a lot of the images and the pictures. Probably the most difficult text that we work with is the documentary 9/11 that was filmed by the two French brothers. And if you've never had a chance to see it, it really does kind of capture what that day was for the people who were in the building, because one of the brothers is on the street filming, and they're one of the first with filming firemen, and they're one of the first groups to actually go to the building. He's filming inside one of the towers. But we have to have conversations about what are you going to see, how could this make you feel, and we also have to be open to the fact that it's okay to step away from it. But seeing, it's I think it's more powerful for them to see what firemen were facing, and to hear their voices, and to see their bravery. That tells us much more about the day than the actual violence of the plane.
Mm-hmm. A few years ago, when I'm curious to hear from you. We use, I don't like to use the word anniversary, for something like this.
Yeah.
2021 marks 20 years since the terrorist attacks, is how I prefer to say that. A few years ago, we brought together some reporters and photographers at the station who covered the Branch Davidian siege in Waco several years ago. And we talked about that day, and it was the photographers. It was the photographers, the ones who got that video from that siege, and of the kids coming out of that compound. And another moment Ron and I remember that
Yep.
probably TCU students know, but speaking of the images, it was the photographers who took the pictures, who were still, in a sense, traumatized by what they saw that day. As reporters, professors or students, we talk, we have our stories, our words, but for them, for so many of them, the images they saw live in their heads and live in their hearts, which is understandable, Meredith, why it is you prefer not to see it. What are you doing this week with so much news coverage about the 20th?
Yeah, so normally I try to kind of stay away from watching anything that covers 9/11, just because I don't know, I kind of know enough about it, just having the personal experience. Sometimes I just don't want to see it. But I know for at least my mom, brother, and I got an opportunity to film with ABC News over the summer for a 2020 special with Diane Sawyers, kind of covering moms who were pregnant during 9/11 and had children born after 9/11. And the ABC has kind of been following us, or not following us, but my brother and my mom since he was like 1. So we got to film that. So that is something I will watch because I was a part of it. But for the most part, yeah, I try to stay away from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is nothing wrong with that. Yeah, and I think I heard you say that, Ron, too. At some point, it's okay to step away. It's okay not to watch so much.
Yes, yeah, I think it's smart to figure out what you can handle and what you can manage, but also there's stepping away doesn't mean you cannot reflect, and it also doesn't mean you cannot remember. And in the case of Meredith, even though she's not watching the video, Meredith, I assume you're thinking quite a bit about your father on that day.
Yes,
And
exactly.
and that's the thing that's kind of struck me over the years, because since I've taken students to New York City probably for about the past 10 years, and over the course of that time, we've met a number of firemen, a couple who were in the tower that day, many who lost individuals, and the refrain they keep saying over and over and over is, "Please remember," and please, I want you. They constantly will take us to the memorial and show us a name and tell us the story of that human being. But they tell us, they're not just telling us; they want us to make that part of our DNA, and to remember that person. and they plead for us to remember that person on this day and to take the memory of that individual to make our lives better. And I think that's, we're 20 years away, and that's one of the big takeaways is that there, as tragic as that day was, there are a lot of people that we can celebrate, we can remember, and that's the process of healing, but it's also the process of remembering that we have to engage. It's our civic responsibility.
As you were talking about that, Ron, I smiled a little bit because, and I'm, do you remember the name Todd Beamer?
Yes.
Todd Beamer. Todd Beamer was on the United Airlines flight that the passengers on that plane had realized something was happening, that something was going on, and that their plane was potentially going to be used as a weapon to target another building and to kill more people. And Todd Beamer, the story was the one who on that the passengers ended up overtaking the terrorists, and the plane crashed, killing everyone. But the phrase that Todd Beamer was quoted as saying is "Let's roll." And so that is this, that is one of the stories, Ron, you talk about it. You remember the people. Todd Beamer is a name and a phrase I'll remember. And now, Meredith, because of you and sharing the story of your father, Lieutenant Commander Williams, you're right. It is another connection. It's like I met his daughter. She goes to TCU. She has grandparents who live in the Arlington area. So I really, again, do appreciate you sharing this. I'm curious, you say you have had some experience being interviewed, not just this or TCU Magazine, but on a network level, ABC. So I wonder, what do you think the media gets wrong in covering September 11th events?
I would say maybe something. See, I don't actually watch a lot of 9/11 stuff, and I don't read a lot about it. But what I do see, I would say maybe one thing they kind of get wrong is there seems, obviously each event was very tragic, but there seems to be a lot of focus on the Twin Towers and not as much on what happened in Pennsylvania and on the Pentagon. So I kind of feel wish they kind of make them more isolated events, which obviously they were, but at the same time, they all are kind of like the same, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. It does make sense because, yes, they were all victims of terrorism and lost their lives on that day. You are correct. Thank you for sharing that. As we think about collective experiences, we are in a sense experiencing that right now collectively. With COVID-19, I think that we collectively experience that with the death of George Floyd. We have these kinds of, collective experience, but, they're different. But Ron, do you find them in your conversations about cultural memory? Are there any similarities from these big events that we're facing?
Sure. I think one of the things that's similar, and this is something my students and I talk about, but it's that we have collective memory, but the farther we move away from an event, it becomes a little bit more fickle. And it's not as, we would like to think that it's a unifying memory that we have that brings us completely together, but we become more siloed. And one of the things that has struck me about with memory with COVID is that we've become siloed in our memories. So we have kind of these memory threads, and we all have, some of us are on this collective memory thread, some of us are on this collective memory thread, and we see the event from a very different perspective. Where while we all have collective memory of 9/11, those threads, the different threads of memory exist. And I actually think Meredith talked a little bit about it. If you live in Washington, D.C., you remember the Pentagon, and you remember the smoke and the tower of smoke that came across D.C. I think a lot of people in New York City, because of the timing of the planes hitting the buildings, there are people I've met from New York City that didn't realize the Pentagon had been hit till much later in the day because they were in the midst of this. So there are these different memory threads that kind of grow collectively. So there's a similarity. I hope that makes sense. But it depends on context, where you are. That kind of shapes how you remember and what you remember.
Yeah, that's a very good point. How Meredith, when you talk to your classmates, it's not like you go and say, I would assume that you wouldn't, that you go say, my dad was in the Pentagon on September 11th. My guess is, Meredith, that's not something you just kind of come out and say. Yeah. So how does it come up in conversation with you? And when you do share that, what's the experience like for you and for those who hear your story?
Well, honestly, for one, I normally, my close friends don't really know. It's not really something I talk about. And it actually doesn't come up until I'm describing my siblings, because when my dad adopted me when I was 3. So when he married my mom, he had 2 daughters from a previous marriage. So when I try to explain that lineage, and it's like, wait, I don't understand, like the remarriage. I'm like, oh, well, my dad actually died in 9/11, and that's why I have a blended family. And then it's kind of awkward, like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. And I always try to reassure people, like, I'm totally comfortable talking about it. I do not feel awkward about it. Like, it's okay. I always try to like reassure people that I don't want, because I feel like it's honestly more uncomfortable for them to find out than it is for me to be saying it.
Yeah, kind of like when I asked you that question, Meredith, are you okay talking about it? So thank you. Do you ever, and then when you're sharing that, do people ask follow-up questions about September 11th? Do they look for you to maybe give them a little history lesson on what that means and what happened?
I always let people know, if you have any questions, I'm totally comfortable asking them. And, the most basic question I get is, where was it? And that's kind of more it, because I think people still are kind of uncomfortable to dig deeper, because especially for my generation, chances are they have not really met anyone who has been directly affected by 9/11. So they don't really know how to go about talking about it and asking about it, for fear of making me upset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for those of you who are with us in the virtual audience, if you're hearing from Meredith there, that if you have, questions that you would like to ask her or comment you would like to share, she is open to that. And, of course, Dr. Pitcock, he enjoys engaging in conversation with students and everyone. So by all means, if there's something that you want to ask or something that you want to share, please do. I don't mean to hog the conversation, but we do want to make this as interactive as possible. So please jump in and be part of the conversation. I am curious, Meredith, you have information to share. Dr. Pitcock, you have information to share. So with today's generation of students, a lot of social media is where a lot of folks go to get their news. And that can bring challenges. So how do you go between facts and commentary? Do you have a go-to source? And you don't have to say NBC5 Today. That is A-okay. I totally understand. But I'm curious.
I think the challenge, the biggest challenge is, and what I would try to challenge students to do, is to read multiple sources. It's actually maybe having a go-to source isn't the right thing. And that maybe reading broadly and reading multiple sources and making sure you're reading not just news but also long form. Trying to inundate your life with multiple sources so you can get multiple perspectives, I think will provide you a better understanding of the situation. Too much today, because of speed or because of ease. I'm not sure what it is, but we have our 1 or 2 sources that we go to, and we think that's it. And not all sources are as good as NBC News 5. And so there's your plug. But students need to consider multiple sources in order to really educate themselves and to create an informed opinion.
Yeah, and Meredith, you're a strategic communication major. What are your thoughts about getting information?
I've actually gotten the same advice from my professors, where that is, if you're getting information about something, make sure you read it from multiple different news sources, because then also you can kind of see, oh, maybe this source actually did have a biased opinion on it that I didn't realize when I was reading it. And especially being a political science minor, a lot of times when I'm citing sources for a factual paper, I have to be very, very careful that I'm not citing like an opinion piece.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, how did you want to become a political science major? Did your dad's experience in the Navy or Pentagon have any influence on that?
Yeah, honestly, I feel like I've always been very interested in politics, and it's probably because my adoptive dad was in the Navy until 2012. So everything that went on with the government kind of affected my everyday life, like where I lived, like my dad's job. So it was just kind of natural that because it affected me, I got interested in it.
Yeah, yeah. You talk about everyday life, and I think you mentioned this too, Meredith, about the ripple effects
Hmm.
from that day 20 years ago. And I mentioned, like, for instance, when we go to the airport to catch a plane, we have to go through, security now, and we can't, we're limited on the size of liquids we can take through the X-ray machine. What are some other things that have continued to impact our lives 20 years later?
I feel like for me at least, I mean, it could be anything. I go on Facebook and I see like, oh, my maternal grandmother and my aunt kind of posting something about my dad, or even here at TCU, I'm on the post 9/11 GI Bill, and that's every semester I have to reapply for my benefits to make sure it's getting paid for.
Hmm. Yeah, Ron, what bubbles up for you?
Um, the thing that struck me, one of the snapshot memories I have on 9/11 was the picture of the Congress standing on the steps of the U.S. Capitol, singing "God Bless America." And um, I wish we would. I wish we could return to that moment, because that moment demonstrated so much unity. And really, today, I don't know that. I wonder what it would take to get our leaders to join together on steps and stand next to one another. So, I kind of look at the past 20 years, and I find myself asking, how do we come from that moment of great unity and to a world where we're so divided? And that's a complex. It's a basic question to ask, but it's a really complex question to answer, and I don't have the answers. But that's where I find myself reflecting. It's not so much the day-to-day events as much as it is the grand scale of who we are, and what does our country represent.
Yeah, that's true. And I think too, I mean, patriotism after that, just, soared with so many young
Yeah.
men and women saying that they wanted to join the military to defend this country. That was another big ripple effect from it.
Yeah.
Mary, will you explain about the post GI Bill for those who don't know?
Yes. So, to my knowledge, and I could be getting this wrong because my parents always have to explain it to me, the post 9/11 GI Bill basically states, I forget exactly like what the exact credentials are, but if you were in the military, it used to be before 9/11, if you had a GI Bill, and say you didn't want to use it on yourself, but you had 3 children, one of your kids could get your GI Bill and would pay for all the benefits of their college, but the other two could not use your GI Bill. And the post 9/11 GI Bill basically says that um, if you still have GI Bill benefits that you did not use and you have 3 children, all 3 of your children can use it. I think, to my understanding, that is what it is.
Okay. Well, I don't have any direct knowledge of that. So yes, Meredith, thank you for at least giving us that little bit of information. As you all are out there listening and connecting with us and listening to Meredith and Ron, I mean, definitely share. I like how you described it, Ron, that snapshot memory of that you have. If you have memories, I mean, we would love to hear from you and share in this moment, because I think it is in talking about it, it helps us process. And I know when we first started and that 3-minute video was playing with the TCU skiff articles and that music was going, I was clearly a little emotional about what was happening. But I do think in this discussion that we've had, and Meredith, you sharing the stories about your dad, I mean, that there is, yeah, there are, these are lives also to celebrate. And I think it helps seeing that picture of you in the Navy t-shirt from your dad as well. It is. So as we go through this, I'm not on campus. I'm curious, what are the plans there on campus for the rest of the week and the observance of this 20th year? Can one of you share? And is there ways for the public to participate if desired?
Yeah, I don't know what the official plans are. I suspect that this year, like in past years, there will be. They usually have flags out in the commons representing the lives that were lost that day. I know there tend to be ceremonies up at the flags to remember But I don't know what the specific memory events that are happening on campus.
Mhm. And do you find, Ron, I mean, since you all have done this in years past, are they well attended? Are people taking time to reflect and remember?
Yeah, it's interesting. My office, if I look outside my office, I see frog fountains. So I have a really good view of the fountain, but also of where the flags are. And it's meaningful and it's emotional to look out there and to see people walk among the flags, to pause, to think, um, to not just blow by the flags, but to actually pause and to reflect. And so I do think you see people who are reflecting, and I also appreciate the students who stop and they want to know, why is this here?
Mhm.
And that's a chance for them to become educated. So I do see students paying close attention to that display.
Yeah. Meredith, have you been to any of the memorial sites?
Um, on TCU, no, I have not. But I'm going up to Arlington on Friday to attend the 20th anniversary. I believe they call it like it's a memorial observance. They have like a special word for it. But yes, I'll be there on Saturday. So
Will this be the first big observance you've attended?
no, I've been when we lived closer to Arlington. Obviously I went to the first and second anniversary, and then we normally go for the big ones. So 5, 10, 15, and 20 is what I've been to.
Mhm. And what has that been like for you?
They're very emotional. It is great having my mom and my sister and my younger brother with me, because it is hard and there is definitely a lot of crying. But at the same time, it's kind of trying to think of the right word for it, but being surrounded by everyone else who we've kind of known through the years, because their family members also past 9/11 it's kind of nice being reunited with them again as well.
Yeah, that collective experience that Ron talks about, and I'm going to ask Meredith. I might be prying. You can tell me no, but what in your home, in your family's home, do you have a picture of your dad? Are there certain things around to keep his memory alive?
We keep his shadow box it's hung in my living room, and we have just kind of various pictures of him throughout the house. And I have this little in the TCU magazine, there was this little like Pentagon like figurine thing that I think is just kind of somewhere in my living room. They're not obvious, like you would kind of have to be looking for it. It's just kind of little subtle things to remind us of him.
How old was your dad?
He was 32.
He was very young, very
Mhm.
young, about to become a dad for the first time. Can you tell me can you share with folks about what you all do on his birthday?
Yeah, so on his birthday, he for some reason loved Slurpees from 7-Eleven, and my mom was growing up. It was like that was our very special treat. Was on his birthday. We always got a Slurpee from 7-Eleven because he loved them so much. So that's always what we do. It's fun.
Yeah, your dad was he had definitely good taste.
Yeah.
7-Eleven is Dallas based. I know it's all over the world, but
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
yeah, where did your dad grow up?
He actually grew up in California and then moved to Virginia in high school, where he went to VMI.
Okay, California kid. Now, did he ever get to set foot in the great state of Texas?
To my knowledge, no, unless it was like a training kind of sort of mission for the Navy. But yeah, I don't think so.
I know one of our slogans here at the station is Texas connects us. So I'm always looking for I'm always looking for the Texas connection. I was asking Ron earlier. You may have heard about what are the plans on campus this week to mark 20 years since September 11th, and I understand now that TCU plays the Golden Bears on September 11th this year. There will be a flyover, a large American flag on the field during the national anthem, and flags will line our facilities. So that will be a beautiful tribute to what happened 20 years ago. It's interesting, there's like Associated Press guidance on how we refer to this date and the way we write it. Usually 9/11, but for some reason I prefer to say the date, the month and the date, September 11th. September 11th. I don't know why that is, but that is important to me as opposed to just abbreviate it 9/11. Maybe because it's too similar to 7/11. I'm not sure, but Ron, can you play head games with me there and dive into my head and tell me what might be going on?
No, but I'll tell you that I also prefer September the 11th. Just because that's what it was. You know, you woke up and it was September the 11th. I feel like the 9/11, for me, it's too close to the fact those are the numbers that we would call for emergency, right? 911. And I also feel like it does a disservice to abbreviate it. You know, it was September the 11th, 2001, and that's the day, that we'll always remember. I prefer. I don't prefer the abbreviation either.
Yeah. Okay. We're kind of like-minded. Meredith, does either?
I agree. I agree with y'all. I like September 11th better. I prefer it.
Good. Then when it comes to Meredith, we're on the right side of things, Ron. I appreciate it. We do have a couple of questions, and I think, Ron, you may have discussed this a little bit, but when you described that snapshot that you remember of Congress, you know, members of Congress standing on the steps, very unified, and singing "God Bless America," and that is an image. And who knows? Could we ever see that kind of unified show of support again?
So I'm not a political scientist, so I don't know that I can answer that question, except that I hope so. I hope so, because I think one of the takeaways of September the 11th is that that we need to work to celebrate the things that link us, that we share, to build on our similarities, and to not let the things that we disagree on divide us. So I would hope that that would be one lesson we would learn and we would remember 20 years out, and maybe find a way to embrace that and to model it. And I think the Congress would be a great place to see that happen. So I'm hopeful.
Meredith, are you familiar with that snapshot that he has?
I actually am not. I've never heard of that before.
That's okay. Something to look for a little bit later. Somebody has also asked me, I guess I've been like a little teary-eyed through this. How do I process my own trauma response while covering breaking news? Oh, goodness. Yeah. Thank goodness we're almost out of time, right? I'll tell you, people will often ask, because sometimes it's tough what we cover, on the news. And it was tough then. It's, tough now. And, there are days that you just go home and you're kind of like, I just kind of want to crawl in bed and be in my little shell. And I do what you do sometimes, Ron and Meredith, I don't watch the news. I take a break, Thankfully, when we've had, several traumatic incidents that we've had to cover here lately. And we have a management team here at the station that will, make, counseling available, people to talk to, and really encourage us to have conversations and to avail ourselves of the support systems that our company does, provide, because you do carry it with you. It's not something that, how do you talk about it? How do you do it? No, I live here. I live here. I know people, I have friends, and, we feel too. And we cry too, and we bleed too. And so thank you very much for that question. And I do appreciate that. We have a few more coming in. And one of them, again, is for you, Ron. Do you remember when you had to change your approach to talking about September 11th with students as their memories have become more faded, or even in some cases now non-existent?
Sure. I'm teaching the course this semester, and I was teaching a poem by Seamus Haney, and some students said, "How can I know about 9/11? I was in utero when this happened," And so that's the moment where I felt really old. But I noticed that the real difference is when there are students who remember being at school, and they remember parents coming to pull them out of school. So they have an awareness that something happened. And then it's probably, I'm going to guess, maybe 4 years ago, students no longer had that memory of being in school and being pulled out, or having that teacher tell them something. And so I think probably about 4 years ago, we had to change to this idea of, I had to add a class where we talked about, okay, this is what it was. And the approach there is to talk about how the history books teach it. And how they teach 9/11 from a very factual basis, and then we have to spend weeks unpacking it and demonstrating that there's much, much more to it than how history presents it. But probably about 4 or 5 years ago is when we stopped having students who remember being in that classroom space and being taken home.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned, Ron, that French documentary.
Yeah.
Are there other resources? Are there other things that you think people should, read or watch if they do want to know more about what happened?
Yeah. I love literature and I love reading, and so I appreciate looking at how authors wrestled with the trauma and what we were feeling during that time period. So one of the books that I think is a very much a 9/11 book, because the main character is a young child whose father dies in the towers. Is Jonathan Safran Foer is extremely loud and incredibly close, and it's a book that it doesn't focus on the violence as much. The violence is always present, but it really focuses on the trauma and the notion of recovery and the notion of love, and also what you talked about a little bit ago, Deborah, which is relying on each other and having to pick up the pieces and move forward, but to do it in a way that honors the memory of the person who was lost. Yeah. And I think that's the book for me that really captures what 9/11 was, but also challenges us on how to live and how to think about 9/11.
Yeah, definitely. So, well, Meredith Casimas and Ron Picklock, you both have helped us do that today, process and think about how we remember September 11th. Meredith, I do appreciate your candor with us. I appreciate your time. If we were together, I'd probably want to reach over and give you a hug, but I think I can say for all of us who have watched you today and listened to you that if your dad, 32-year-old Lieutenant Commander David Williams, was here, he'd be so proud of you, and so proud even more that you're a Horned Frog. So thank you. And, we'll be with you and thinking about you on September 11th. And to Ron Picklock, continue to educate those Horned Frogs and talk about collective memory and help us to continue process this event and many others afterwards. Any final words from each of you?
I just want to say I'm really thankful for Meredith, and I'm thankful for people like Meredith who share their stories, because those are the stories that are going to help us remember September the 11th in a way that is meaningful and in a way that challenges us to be better humans. And so, Meredith, thank you for doing this.
And thank y'all for having me. I'm so glad I could share more about my dad, and just, thank you.
When's his birthday, Meredith?
February. My mom's is February 1st and his is February 2nd. But sometimes I get it flip-flopped where he's the 1st and she's the 2nd.
This was Groundhog Day?
Yes, his is Groundhog Day, yes.
Groundhog Day, February 2nd. Okay, so I'm going to challenge everybody. Keep that date, February 2nd. When it rolls around in 2022, let us all go have a 7-Eleven Slurpee and have it in honor of your dad, Lieutenant Commander David Williams. Thank you both for being with us. To everybody who's in the audience out there this afternoon, thank you so much for joining us. Yes, 2222, exactly. To TCU Magazine and to TCU Alumni Association, thank you for hosting this event and putting it together and for allowing me to be part of it. You can keep up to date on happenings at TCU and among the Horned Frog family at magazine.tcu.edu. To listen or to share today's event, as well as numerous other fantastic interviews with TCU alum and TCU Magazine features, you can subscribe to the podcast. You can do so by searching TCU Alumni on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or SoundCloud. And with that, lady and gentlemen, it is time for us to close this session. TCU presents How We Remember September 11th. Have a good afternoon, everyone, and we'll see you sometime down the road.